Yes. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got our next speaker now, and it's not often, to be honest with you, that I get to introduce a speaker at a business conference who starts with doctor. So this is, our next speaker is Dr. Graeme Codrington, and he actually has 5 degrees, including an MBA and a Master's in Sociology. But he's not just an academic. He's also comes from the client side at KPMG. He's also run 2 of his own businesses. And what he's going to talk to us about today is something very important that's been already alluded to, is about the importance of values-based selling. Not value-based selling, but values-based selling. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Graeme Codrington.
People try to put us down about my generation.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you this morning. And yes, we're going to talk about values-based selling. In fact, picking up on a comment that Don has just made about the different generations that we find in our workplaces and in our business environments at the moment, and how we can connect to them by understanding what drives their behavior, what drives their attitudes, and what drives their values. If you are on Twitter, if you are connected, we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. Sean McFeet will be talking about e-selling later. But in this case, don't switch your phones off. If you are on a smartphone and are connected to Twitter, why don't you comment along? And I've also queued up about 6 or 7 things for you to read as we go through the presentation. So a little bit extra if you can. As sales professionals, what we're trying to do constantly is to make connections with people. That's at the heart of what we do when we're selling. Trying to find the people who we can give that value to. Trying to connect with them. And the easiest way to make that connection is to segment into the mass of people that are available for us to connect with. Grouping people according to the value that we can add. Trying to find the people who will respond to the value propositions that we give. Now, obviously, there's a variety of different ways we can segment our markets. We know that men and women buy and sell differently, and we need to take that into account. I am the sole male in my home. I have a wife and 3 daughters, 12, 10, and 6. I thought we should give them names, but my wife said numbers were fine. But 12, 10, and 6 and my wife are fundamentally different in how they engage. What women buy, they also sell. And men are not so good at doing that. We know this. We also know that people from different cultures do things differently. My accent has probably given me away already. Although I live in Wimbledon now, I am from slightly further south of the river in London, originally from Johannesburg. And we do things differently. In South Africa, versus London. And when I moved to London a few years ago, it took me a long time to realize that the buying signals were very different in a different culture. Different religions, different age groups, all of these things we understand. And we understand that the single human being standing in front of us, this person we're trying to sell to, is a complex mix of all of these underlying values. But we have to try and connect to those values. You see, it's values, that part of you which decides what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, what is normal and weird. It's that part of you that we as salespeople can connect to most in order to get the strongest possible response. We have to move beyond obvious behavior. We have to move beyond visible attitude to get down to those deep underlying drivers. And the more we can do that, the more successful we will be in our selling task. But we have a problem. Other people's values are different to ours. That's an obvious thing to say, but it's important to understand. For example, today's young people have an exceptionally different set of values, a different set of expectations as they come into the world of work and increasingly become important in our frame of reference. I'm talking about people in their early 20s. I'm talking about those young snots who drive you mad in the office. Maybe they work with you, maybe they work for you, maybe They're just in the background somewhere. But they have a different expectation of what the working day will look like. They have a different expectation of how you engage and how you make decisions. This is probably my favorite image of this generation, because those 4 young people are actually sending text messages to each other. That's how they choose to communicate with each other. And if we don't understand that there's an exceptionally different approach, and it's not something that they're going to grow out of either. This different approach is a new generation using new technologies, living in a new world of work with new values coming into our world. And they're not going to grow up to become like you. And we need to learn how to connect with them. I could show you the research, but let me just show it to you this way. I wonder if you've ever encountered a young person who kind of approaches life like this.
1 minute. 1 minute, please. Time, thank you. Could you all please put down your pens and bring your papers to the front of the room? Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. Gave you plenty of warnings about time. You failed. Sorry.
Excuse me, do you know who I am?
I have absolutely no idea.
Good.
Yeah, you laugh now, but it's not so funny when that's sitting across the table from you in the negotiation room. And this is what I want to suggest to you this morning. That if we are needing to connect at a values level, one of the easiest ways that you can do this is actually to understand the values of different generations. This is not the silver bullet, it's not the perfect solution, it's not the only thing you have to do in the sales process, but it's one that I think we often ignore. We just look at people older and younger than ourselves, and we think that they're vaguely similar to us, and off we go. But I think that as an added value to your sales process, if you were to add in this concept of understanding that people from different generations, people older and younger than yourself, have different value sets and therefore should be approached differently, I think it could make a significant difference. So let's just quickly have a look. Don mentioned in his talk the 4 different generations that are working side by side in the workplace. And he's exactly right. The oldest of those generations who are still in the workplace, these are not the oldest people in the world. My 97-year-old grandmother, who's still alive, lives in Bournemouth. And doesn't everybody's grandmother live in Bournemouth? Certainly feels that way when I visit her. But we're not thinking about the oldest people in the world. The oldest people in the workplace are this generation, so-called silent generation, because they grew up in a time when children were seen and not heard. Now, I told you I've got 3 daughters. Those of you with children, is that seen and not heard thing working for you? Times have changed, have they not? But this generation was seen and not heard. That's where they get their title from. As you can see, born during the Great Depression and World War II, shaped and formed and influenced in those difficult days. And this is the key for understanding generations, is that the first 10 or 15 years, those early years of your lives, are absolutely essential for shaping your value systems. The world that you grew up in, the political, economic, social environment, the way in which people parented, the education policy and the curriculum, all of these factors, even the popular culture of movies and music, all influenced your value system. So no surprise that people who were born during tough times, a Great Depression, a World War, had their values shaped in such a way that they have an approach, even to this day, that makes sense to us, knowing where they came from. Now, you don't have to know any history, to be honest, to know where this generation has come from, because if you give anybody in their 70s even half a chance, they will tell you about the world that shaped and formed their values. Normally they say things like, when I was young, we never had. And whatever it is you've just been talking about, they had to get up before the sun and walk 5 miles. Sorry, have you ever noticed how everything that was built during the Great Depression was built 5 miles away from everything else, and always uphill? Have you noticed how steep the hills were during the war? Tough times, always raining apparently. And that attitude lives with them to today. My mother is from this generation, and she will throw nothing away. Expiry dates on tins of food are meaningless information in her life. Birthday, Christmas times come around, she brings beautifully wrapped gifts. We're not allowed to get all excited and rip them open. When my mother's around, you have to carefully remove the sticky tape and unwrap them carefully, because she wants her wrapping paper back. It's not to recycle it, that's what the kids are into, it's to reuse it next year. Why? It's not because she can't afford it. It's because it's a value system. She can't even tell you why she does it. It's just part of who she is. By the way, don't write everything down that you see on the screen. I'll make sure that this presentation is available for you. I'll give you the website at the end of the presentation. It'll be up within 15 minutes and you can download it and use it to your heart's content. So what do we do when we're selling to the silent generation? Obviously, in 30 minutes, we can't do a whole training course for you here. But very simply, what you'll want to do is obvious. You'll want to sell the fact that you are a tried and tested product. This is not a generation that's going to be interested or excited by innovation and untested new stuff. They want something that's tried and tested and stood the test of time. It isn't also about the big things. This is a generation for whom spelling and grammar on your contracts is going to be important. I know that you don't read those little tick here to confirm you've read the terms and conditions things on websites. This generation does. And when they read your terms and conditions, they will get irritated by spelling mistakes. And it can be a deal breaker. Now, how do you explain that to a 27-year-old salesperson who probably doesn't even know what the spelling is to start with? This is important. Big things, like making sure that you don't just sell them on an individualistic basis. This is not a generation that wants to be told, you deserve it, treat yourself. They don't think that way. They never have. That's not going to work at a values level. Big things, but also small things. Wear a tie. Look smart. Look like a salesperson is supposed to look. It's important because it touches values. But the war didn't last forever, and the Great Depression was a long distant memory. Elvis and the Beatles were running around, and a new era had dawned. It was the 1950s and 60s, the time of drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And a new generation was born. A generation that saw the greatest achievements of human history. We put a man on the moon. The civil rights movement spreading across the world. And of course, England actually won a football World Cup. History. Okay, so South Africa's never even got to the finals. It's fine. No surprise that a generation who grew up during that era being told, you can do anything, you can be who you want to be. No surprise that their values, those driving values, are very different from their parents'. This is the first generation in history where more than half of the children did not do what their parents had done for a living. That might not sound like a big piece of information, but it is a huge piece of information. Most of you, I think, in this room are boomers or on the edge of being boomers. And you got to choose what you wanted to do with your life. And you can still make that choice. This is a generation that's going to continue to make that choice. Right at the bottom there, they are not going to retire when they hit age 65. And that's not just because they can't afford it. That's going to be a nice excuse for them to use. But this is a generation that cannot retire. I know they think that gardening, golfing, and fishing every day sounds like fun until they do it. You know who I'm talking about. 65-year-olds who retired, and after 2 weeks they knew they couldn't do it, so they've come back to their old industry. They're working mornings only at double the hourly rate and called consultants. You know these people. Some of you are these people. The sales profession is going to be flooded by them, I think, over the next few years. It's also a generation that believes in looking after themselves. Health and wellness are important to them. They are the youngest old people the world has ever seen. And I apologize for calling you old. I know you're not. It's a generation that believes that anything is possible. And in the world of work, this is a generation that has brought in all sorts of systems and processes and structures and efficiencies and productivities. And they love their techniques. In fact, almost every book ever written on sales was written by boomers with boomers in mind. So I don't need to say too much more about how to sell to these guys, because everything you've ever learned about selling is baby boomer stuff mainly. Selling 101. Because this profession was built by boomers. Boomers who put in the hard work, who understood the processes, who have all the steps in place, and who know if they go through that process, they will succeed. This is a generation that has changed the world, has changed how we engage. Now let me just help you quickly understand how this might help us. Before we move to the younger generations, give you a quick example of how knowing whether someone is from the silent generation or a baby boomer can change your sales approach. This is not the best product, the easiest product to sell at the moment. Equity release, remortgaging. You've turned 55, you've paid off your house, congratulations, but you can't or don't want to move anywhere, but there's equity in your house. The bank will give you some money, will release that equity to you. It's a product, it's out there, it's well sold, it's tough. Let's say your first appointment is with someone from the silent generation. How are you going to convince someone from the silent generation that equity release is a product for them? This is a tough sell, isn't it? The silent generation sees the house as something they spent their whole lives working to pay off, not so that they could enjoy it, but so that they can give it to the kids. If you do anything to put that at risk, they will shut you down. You have to show them that there is limited risk, that it's all insured. You have to get the kids on board. Help them to sell this product to their children, because their children are going to have to sign off, if you like. But now your second appointment of the day with the house next door is with a baby boomer. It's still not an easy sell, but it's certainly easier, isn't it? Now you can pull out all of your big guns. Oh, well done, you were very clever. You saw value in the street and you bought the house at wow, what price? You were amazingly clever at doing that, and you've paid it off, well done. And now go on. You deserve it. And show them the brochures that have pictures. I don't know why they always play tennis on those brochures, but that seems to be the game of choice. Playing tennis on the cruise ship, spending money on yourself. That brochure should never have left your bag in the first house, because that's not what the silent generation will do with any money they get. They will use it to fund their grandchildren's university. They will use it to fund their own health care, because they don't want to be a burden on anyone. The baby boomers are going on a round the world cruise. You need two different brochures. You need two different sales techniques. And the silent generation person could be 67 years old, and the baby boomer could be 63. Your database, which gives you date of birth, won't tell you that there's a difference in generation, an entirely different sales process required for people who are just 4 years difference in age. The 55 plus market is not a single market. It is differentiated by at least 2, probably 3 different generations. But now, let's have a look at what happened to the world. You see, that idealism of the 1950s and 60s gave way to the dark days of the 1970s and 80s. Oil embargoes, strikes, winters of discontent, difficult times all around the world, eventually culminating in these events. All of these events took place in 1989, by the way. All of them in the second half of 1989. Tiananmen Square on the 4th and 5th of June. The death of the Ayatollah in Iran on the 6th of June. The Baltic Way, 23rd of August. The Berlin Wall came down on the 9th of November. The Velvet Revolution in Prague on the 17th and 18th of November. Ceausescu on Christmas Day of 1989. The Communist Party was banned on Boxing Day of 1989 by Mikhail Gorbachev. And, okay, ruining my 1989 story completely, Nelson Mandela was released from jail after 27 years on the 11th of February 1990. But it's still 8 months. Because sometimes everything everywhere can just change. North, south, east, west. A new era was dawning. And the generation of young people who grew up during those difficult, uncertain times of the 1970s and 80s have been called Generation Variable. Generation X. That's where the name comes from if you've heard it before. The unknown. The factor that, well, we can't really put our finger on it. And as they grew up asking their parents, what's going on? Their parents were fairly clear that nobody really knew. And that you needed to get used to the fact that you didn't know what was coming in the future. Think about that. This is probably the first generation of young people who grew up knowing for sure that they didn't know what the future looked like. That again sounds like a small piece of information, but it's huge. And these people are not the young people. Baby boomers, those of you who are in your 40s and 50s, these people are younger than you, and just because they're not turning into you doesn't mean they're not growing up. They are in their 30s and 40s. If they want to get married, they are probably married. If they want to have children, they probably have them already. Interestingly, they're probably turning down promotions in your company right now. That's going to be the big news from this generation. They don't want to move up through the corporate ranks, and you offer them the job of sales director, and they're going to turn you down. Not because they don't want the job, but because the job means they have to move to a different city. And they're not prepared to move because their son just made the first team rugby. And that's the reason they're not moving. Because for them, family comes first. They will only put in as much effort as they need to, the minimum effort required, for their purposes. If you're a big brand name company, they're probably only working for you because they want your name on their CV. Not because they want to help you grow your business. They do what they need to do in order to achieve their own goals. How on earth do you sell to a generation that has grown up on wanting to be surprised, on needing everything to be personalized and customized? Well, you've got to do a little bit of that for them. You've got to respond at speed. This is a generation who expects to get a text message from you before you've left the building, to thank them and tell them what the next step is. This is a generation that isn't idealistic. They are reactive. You can't sell them the ideals. You have to sell them only on goals and outcomes, not on ideals and vision. And you have to respect their family time. Be careful at what time of the day you phone them. In fact, don't bother to phone them because they're not answering anyway. It's a tough crowd. Maybe an advert will help you to understand what will connect with them. Maybe this is better than my words. Have a look at this. Some of you don't know whether to be shocked, offended, or impressed, or all three at the same time. There's probably a workshop in that advert alone, but the highlights package is simple. You want to connect with this generation at a values level, it has to be fun, possibly even irreverently fun. You have to offer freedom and flexibility. That may count in even how you manage them, as well as how you sell to them. And you have to understand that family is important to them. But of course, there's a younger generation. This is where we started, and we're back there again. Generation Y. Called Y because Y comes after X. That's one reason. Other people have suggested there are other reasons why Y is a significant thing, maybe too much information. But it's also because they are Generation Y. Why? This is probably the best parenting, management, and sales tip I could give you today. If you are connecting with young people, teenagers, and people in their early 20s, tell them why. Not what and how and who and when. I know you'll tell them that anyway. We don't tell people why. We don't tell them why they should do something. We don't tell them why they should do it that way. And we don't tell them why it's necessary to be done by then. We don't do that because when we asked our dad why, well, maybe that was the response in some houses. In my house, the response was, because I said so. And I worked out that why wasn't worth asking. You were wasting your time. This generation is living in a world which deluges them with data. They are flooded with information. They cannot keep all of the information that comes their way. And so they only store the information that makes sense for them. They only store the stuff that fits into categories that work for them. And that's what why is all about. And that's at the heart of selling to this generation, is to connect into them a pragmatic, real reason for making the purchase. We have to make sure we get our technology right with this generation because they are confident. Their confidence is built on the fact that they were the chief technology officers of their homes from a very early age. Boomers, I know you know what I'm talking about, because those of you here today who are in your 50s, I know that you can't watch DVDs unless your kids are at home. And that's not because you don't know how to use the remote control. It's worse than that. You don't even know which remote is for the DVD. And when you get a new mobile phone, do you read the manual? Or do you get the neighbor's 11-year-old to work out how to use it and give you a quick lesson? We have to understand that when these young people come into an environment where they know they're being sold to, they have a distinct advantage. My 12-year-old daughter, Amy, uses her smartphone as she goes around the shops to take photographs of the barcodes of products she's interested in. She uploads that photograph to the International Barcode Registry and within 20 seconds knows everything there is possible to know about that product. No salesperson on the floor of any store is a match for Amy. How do you get the advantage? How do you negotiate in an environment where before they've come into your office, they've Googled you? Have you ever Googled yourself? Did you Google yourself before your last negotiation and discover the 3 top websites that the person negotiating with you looked at yesterday? You probably didn't. You probably don't have Google alerts that flag up your product line, the person you're negotiating with. And if you don't, it's not going to work for this generation. That's the world they live in. There are no mysteries in their world. There is nothing that can't be known. It's going to change everything. I mean, maybe this is how job interviews are going to go in the future.
Mr. Goodman? What makes you think you're qualified for this job?
Oh! Ah! Stop punching me!
Punching
Please,
you.
sir, no! Don't touch me, kid! Don't throw me out!
Next.
Here it is, huh? Get it?
Just let your body move. I'm a love guru.
I don't think we've begun to understand what this generation is going to do to the world of work. But that's the point. We've had 30 minutes. It's not enough time really to do justice to a huge topic like this. But what I hope I've done is help you to understand why we don't understand. We might have been living in the same house, working in the same office as these people older and younger than ourselves. But we were shaped and formed in different worlds. We have different value systems. We're not going to turn into our parents, and our children are not going to turn into us. These generational value systems will stay with us through our lives. I hope I've given you enough information to get you interested, to maybe look a little bit more at generations and take it a little bit more seriously in your preparation and execution of a sales process. I hope I haven't given you enough information just to be dangerous. I don't want you to go back to the office and say, right, how old are you? 32. Okay, I know exactly who you are now. We're sorted. It's not quite as easy as that, of course. We have these 4 different generations. Some people fit outside of these boundaries. Some people fit between them. I think that's where I am, between the X's and the boomers. But I hope that you will take this as a thought, do a little bit more work about how you can connect to the values of the people you're trying to sell to. I said I'd give you my website. There it is, tomorrowtoday.uk.com. Follow the links on there to presentation summaries. You can download this presentation, many other resources. They're all for free. I'm not trying to spam you or anything. Connect with me on the internet, by email. I'm around for most of the day today. Try and connect with me in the corridors. There's a book you can see if you're interested. Amazon's the best place to get that. And if you are from the silent generation and you'd prefer my postal address, come and get that from me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Graeme, thank you very, very much. I personally found that really, really useful. And